voice speaking, that is. Oh, it's some year, huh? But...
To most, Cyndi Lauper was the dazzling force of 80s pop, a vibrant, eccentric trailblazer who lit up the stage with wild fashion, electric energy, and unforgettable anthems. She was the girl who just wanted to have fun, a symbol of freedom and bold self-expression. But behind the iconic voice and neon hair was a reality far more complicated. Her journey was carved by pain, a childhood scarred by abuse, years of struggle on the streets, personal heartbreak, and silent battles with mental and physical health. What the world saw was a star. What they didn't see was a survivor. This is the untold story of Cyndi Lauper, raw, real, and resilient. Cyndi Lauper was born in the working-class neighborhood of Ozone Park in Queens, New York, a place full of life, noise, and the kind of grit that shaped her early spirit. She grew up in a modest home, surrounded by a family that, at first glance, looked like any other trying to make ends meet. But beneath that surface was a childhood marked by deep emotional wounds and moments that would follow her for the rest of her life. When Cyndi was just 10 years old, her father walked out on the family. For a young girl with a vivid imagination and a craving for stability, the abandonment cut deep. It wasn't just about a father leaving. It was about feeling discarded, like a part of her wasn't enough to make someone stay. That absence created a void, and unfortunately, what came next made things even worse. Her mother, now left to raise the children on her own, remarried in hopes of creating a stable home. But that dream quickly turned into a nightmare. The man she brought into their lives wasn't a protector. He was a predator. Cyndi's stepfather, by her own accounts, was a violent and threatening figure. He created an environment of fear and danger that robbed the household of any sense of safety. Cyndi later revealed that the threat of sexual violence from him became so real, so terrifying, that she made the decision to leave home for good at just 17 years old. It wasn't just a rebellious act. It was a desperate choice for survival. But the pain started even earlier. In school, Cyndi never quite fit in. She dressed differently, spoke differently, and carried herself in a way that didn't conform to what others expected. That individuality, which would later become her signature strength, made her a target as a child. She recalled being mocked, bullied, even physically assaulted by classmates who didn't understand her. Once, she remembered, she was simply scratching a friend's back when a nun at her Catholic school violently grabbed her, threw her against lockers, and accused her of being a lesbian, a word Cyndi didn't even fully understand at the time. The humiliation and violence she experienced in those moments left scars that no one could see. Through it all, music became her only real outlet. She would escape into melodies, scribble lyrics, and find solace in her own creative world. That world was bright and strange and beautiful, the exact opposite of the chaos and cruelty she faced daily. It was her way of surviving. Cyndi Lauper's early years were not defined by joy or security. They were shaped by loss, abuse, and the relentless need to protect her own spirit from being broken. What kept her going wasn't blind hope. It was something more powerful: the refusal to be silenced or swallowed by the darkness around her. Her childhood wasn't just difficult. It was the beginning of a battle for self-worth that she would fight for years to come. After leaving home at 17, Cyndi Lauper stepped out into the world with little more than her dreams and a small bag of clothes. But what waited for her wasn't freedom. It was struggle. The streets didn't care that she had a voice that could move mountains. They didn't care about her heartbreak or the trauma she was trying to outrun. Survival became her full-time job. Without a steady place to live, Cyndi bounced from couch to couch, relying on the kindness of friends and often strangers, just to have a place to sleep. When those options ran out, she'd crash wherever she could: floors, hallways, sometimes parks. She worked whatever odd jobs she could get, most of them paying next to nothing. Laundromats, waitressing, retail, jobs that barely paid enough to cover a meal, let alone rent. There were nights she went to sleep hungry, and days when hunger gnawed at her so deeply, she'd sing on the street just to earn enough coins for something to eat. And when even that didn't work, she did what she had to. She had a boyfriend at the time who was into hunting, not as a sport, but out of necessity. She ate what he brought home, sometimes squirrel. It wasn't a quirky story. It was survival at its most raw and desperate. In the middle of all this, she found herself facing an unplanned pregnancy. It was a complex, emotional moment. She wanted to be a mother. She wanted to love that child. But her partner didn't want the same thing. And more importantly, Cyndi didn't want to bring a child into a life of instability and chaos. She made the painful decision to have an abortion, not out of fear, but out of love. As she would later say, it wasn't that she didn't want the baby. It was that she couldn't bear the thought of raising a child in a world where they might feel unwanted or alone. She continued to wander, sometimes hitchhiking across states, chasing gigs, or simply looking for somewhere that felt safe. But the road wasn't always kind. On more than one occasion, she found herself in dangerous situations. She became a survivor of sexual assault, a trauma that added to the already growing weight she carried. Each day became about pushing forward, just one step ahead of the collapse she could feel coming. It wasn't just the physical toll. The emotional weight became unbearable. Her past haunted her, and the present offered no comfort. At times, she felt like she was dissolving. The anxiety would take over, full body shakes, and overwhelming dread that left her unable to move. She described it later, simply but powerfully. "I just lay in bed all the time. When I couldn't deal with anything, I'd get the shakes. Just complete anxiety attacks." This wasn't the glamorous path to stardom. It wasn't the story people wanted to hear about an up-and-coming artist. But it was real. This was the foundation beneath Cyndi Lauper's future fame. A foundation built not on glitter and MTV, but on pain, persistence, and the will to keep breathing, even when it felt impossible. Her voice, that fierce, unforgettable voice, came from these years, from hunger, from heartbreak, from hurt. She wasn't just trying to be a singer. She was trying to survive. By the late 70s, Cyndi Lauper was worn down but not broken. She was still scraping by, working low-wage jobs, doing background vocals, and performing in local New York clubs whenever she could. Then came the first real glimpse of possibility, a chance to form a band. She joined forces with saxophonist John Turi, and together they formed Blue Angel, a group that fused Lauper's love for rockabilly, punk, and retro pop with a quirky, rebellious twist. Cyndi wasn't trying to be anyone else. Her voice was loud, raw, and unmistakably hers. It soared, wailed, and sometimes cracked with emotion. That sound didn't go unnoticed. A rough demo they recorded somehow landed in the hands of Steve Masarski, a manager known for working with big names. At first, he wasn't impressed with the band's playing, but he couldn't ignore Cyndi's voice. Years later, he'd reflect. There was something interesting about the singer's voice. Something he knew had the power to reach people. Curious, he came to see them live. and that changed everything. On stage, Lauper was electric. Not polished, not packaged, but captivating. Mussorgsky believed in her enough to buy out her old contract and begin pushing Blue Angel toward a record deal. Eventually, they signed with Polydor Records and released their self-titled debut album in 1980. But in an industry driven by trends and timing, Blue Angel didn't catch fire. The album failed to chart, and the quirky, retro-infused style just didn't land with mainstream audiences. Despite Lauper's undeniable charisma and vocal power, the band dissolved into disappointment. Critics noticed her talent, but commercial success was nowhere to be found. What should have been her big break turned into another detour, and one that came with serious consequences. As the band fell apart, tensions behind the scenes erupted. Blue Angel fired Mussorgsky as their manager, but that didn't end things cleanly. He sued them for breach of contract, demanding $80,000 in damages, an amount that might as well have been $1 million to Cyndi at the time. She couldn't afford to fight the case, let alone pay the judgment. With no other option, she filed for bankruptcy. It was a brutal blow, not just financially, but emotionally. Cyndi had risked everything to chase music. And now, she found herself back at square one, broke, unsigned, and watching the first serious attempt at a career collapse in front of her. But what could have been the end of the road wasn't. Because while Blue Angel had faded away, Lauper's voice, the very thing that caught everyone's attention in the first place, remained. She may have lost the band, the record deal, and the money, but she'd proven something to herself and others. She had something special. And even if the industry didn't know what to do with her yet, she wasn't about to disappear. This chapter closed with defeat, but in a strange twist, it also opened a door. Without Blue Angel, without a contract holding her back, Cyndi Lauper was finally free to step forward. This time, on her own. When Cyndi Lauper finally stepped into the spotlight as a solo artist, she did it with a bang loud enough to shake the music world. After years of rejection, heartache, and survival, she released She's So Unusual in 1983. And everything changed. It wasn't just an album. It was an explosion of personality, power, and pure pop magic. The voice that once echoed through subway stations and dive bars now blared from every radio and television screen across America. The record wasn't just a success. It was a phenomenon. She's So Unusual delivered hit after hit, each one more infectious and rebellious than the last. Girls Just Want to Have Fun wasn't just a party anthem. It was a bold declaration of independence, a celebration of women breaking free from expectations and stereotypes. With its vibrant visuals and unfiltered energy, the song quickly became a feminist anthem that transcended genres and generations. Then came Time After Time, a stunning contrast. Soft, aching, and emotional, it proved that Cyndi wasn't just quirky. She was deeply human. The vulnerability in her voice struck a chord, showing a depth and emotional honesty that few pop stars were willing to share. That track alone solidified her range and made it clear she wasn't a gimmick. She was the real deal. True Colors followed, and with it, Cyndi moved even deeper into the emotional space where her artistry lived. It was a song about acceptance, of yourself, of others, of all the broken and beautiful things that make us who we are. It resonated in ways no one expected, becoming a beacon of hope and solidarity for the LGBTQ+ community and anyone who had ever felt unseen. That song didn't just chart, it changed lives. In an era dominated by male rock stars and cookie-cutter pop acts, Cyndi Lauper was unapologetically herself. Her clothes clashed, Her hair changed colors by the week, and her speaking voice was just as bold as her singing one. She didn't try to be polished or perfect. She leaned into her weirdness, and that, in the end, became her greatest strength. MTV, which was still in its early years, embraced her completely. Her music videos were cinematic, chaotic, colorful masterpieces that matched her energy. She brought theater, comedy, and fashion into her visuals, creating a character-driven experience unlike anything else at the time. Cyndi wasn't just singing songs, she was telling stories. Her unique style and outspoken nature quickly turned her into a cultural icon. But more than that, she became a symbol. To women, she was proof that you could be different and still shine. To the queer community, she was a fierce ally long before it was popular or profitable. She stood up for people who felt invisible, because she had been there herself, and she made history. Cyndi Lauper became the first female artist to have 4 top 5 singles from a debut album, a groundbreaking achievement that shattered expectations and opened doors for the unconventional. She's So Unusual wasn't just a title, it was a statement, a challenge, a promise. Cyndi Lauper wasn't just climbing the charts, she was rewriting the rules. Success can be a beautiful thing, but it's also fragile. After the massive highs of She's So Unusual in True Colors, Cyndi Lauper found herself facing something she never expected: silence. In 1989, she released A Night to Remember, an album meant to keep the momentum going, to prove she was more than a moment. But instead, it barely made a ripple. The response was lukewarm, the charts didn't light up, and critics called it forgettable. For someone who had once redefined pop music, the failure was crushing. And it wasn't just her career that was unraveling. Behind the scenes, her personal life was quietly falling apart. Cyndi had spent years working closely with her manager, David Wolf, who was also her romantic partner. Their relationship had been deeply entwined with her music, her image, and her rise to fame. But now, as things began to break down professionally, they were falling apart personally, too. The breakup hit hard. Suddenly, the person who had guided her through the whirlwind of fame was gone. She was left alone, emotionally raw and unsure of what came next. She moved into a New York hotel, not as a glamorous star, but as someone trying to hold herself together in the shadows of her former success. Each day became harder to face. The pressure, the expectations, the disappointment, it all weighed heavily on her. And the loneliness crept in, deeper and darker than ever before. She would go to the studio, hoping the music would lift her like it always had, but afterward, she'd return to her hotel room, sit in the dark, and drink vodka until the silence became too loud to bear. This was no longer the vibrant, colorful girl from MTV. This was a woman breaking under the weight of everything she'd carried for too long. Fame had once felt like escape. Now, it felt like a trap. Her identity had been wrapped up in the bright lights and wild costumes, and when the spotlight dimmed, she wasn't sure who was left. The irony was unbearable. The world still associated her with fun and freedom, but she was spiraling. She later admitted that the thought of ending her life crossed her mind more than once. The darkness seemed unrelenting. And then, in one of her lowest moments, she was struck by a simple, haunting realization. I never wanted a headline to read, "Girl who wanted to have fun just didn't." That line, full of sadness and truth, became a turning point. Because even at her lowest, there was still a spark in her. The same spark that had pushed her through the chaos of her childhood, the hunger of her early years, the rejection, and the noise. It flickered, but it didn't go out. She didn't want her story to end in a quiet hotel room, forgotten by an industry that had once embraced her. She wanted to fight for her joy again, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever found comfort in her music. This chapter of her life wasn't just about failure. It was about reckoning with fame, with heartbreak, with herself. It stripped away the glitter and left her vulnerable, but it also gave her a new kind of strength. The fun-loving rebel who once danced down New York sidewalks in a crinoline dress was still inside her. She just needed time and healing to find her way back. In the middle of rebuilding herself emotionally, Cyndi Lauper faced a new challenge, one that attacked not her spirit, but her body. It started small, an itchy patch on her scalp, something she thought was just a reaction to hair dye or stress. After all, she'd been coloring her hair wild shades for years. But this time, it didn't go away. At first, doctors didn't give her clear answers. Some dismissed it, others misdiagnosed it. But the symptoms grew worse. The itch turned into pain, and the small patch spread across her scalp, then her neck, her arms, her torso. Eventually, it was everywhere. What she was dealing with wasn't a simple rash, it was psoriasis, a chronic autoimmune condition that causes skin cells to build up rapidly, forming scaly, inflamed patches. For someone who made her living performing on stage, it was devastating. The physical pain was constant, the flare-ups unpredictable. Her body became a battlefield. Her skin burned, cracked, and bled, and the condition sometimes made it unbearable just to wear clothes, let alone glamorous costumes. Makeup became a mask, hiding the raw skin underneath. Every performance came with the silent fear that someone would notice, that the lights would expose what she was trying to cover. But the physical pain was only part of it. The emotional weight of the condition was just as heavy. Psoriasis didn't just take a toll on her skin. It chipped away at her confidence, her energy, her joy. She began to cancel appearances. She stopped touring. Some days, she couldn't even get out of bed. Desperate for relief, she turned to every possible treatment: creams, diets, alternative therapies. At one point, she even resorted to coffee enemas, hoping that somehow something would bring her peace. But nothing seemed to help. The condition took over her life. She later said, "I had to work. So I stopped that." This was the heartbreak. For someone who had already endured so much, psoriasis was yet another invisible battle. It didn't come with sympathy. People didn't always understand what she was going through. And in true Cyndi Lauper fashion, she decided that silence wasn't an option. She went public with her condition, speaking out in interviews and teaming up with the National Psoriasis Foundation to raise awareness. She didn't want pity. She wanted people to know they weren't alone. Too many people suffered quietly, ashamed of their skin, their pain, their difference. Cyndi had built her career on celebrating the things that made us unique, and now she was using her platform to do the same for those with chronic illness. Her message was simple and powerful. You are not your disease. You are not your diagnosis. And you are never alone. Psoriasis didn't break her. It pushed her to be even more outspoken, even more compassionate, even more human. Her skin may have felt like it was betraying her, but her voice never did. And once again, that voice became a lifeline, not just for her, but for anyone listening. After decades in the spotlight, Cyndi Lauper could have stepped back, content with the mark she'd already made. But reinvention has always been in her blood. And in her 60s, she surprised the world again. Not with another pop record, but by stepping into the world of musical theater. It was a new stage, literally, and it would become one of the most defining chapters of her creative life. Cyndi teamed up with theater legend Harvey Fierstein to bring Kinky Boots to life, a bold, feel-good Broadway musical based on a true story about a failing shoe factory saved by the vision of a drag performer and a daring new line of high-heeled boots. The story was flashy and heartfelt, blending themes of identity, inclusion, and resilience, values that had always defined Cyndi herself. This time, she wasn't the face on the poster. She was behind the curtain, writing the entire score and lyrics, crafting a sound that was equal parts playful, emotional, and empowering. It was a risk. Broadway isn't easy, even for legends. But Kinky Boots struck a chord with audiences right away. It opened in Chicago for a trial run in 2012, and by the time it hit Broadway in 2013, it was a full-on sensation. The show didn't just perform well, it roared with energy. Cyndi's music lifted every scene, from the anthemic "Raise You Up" to the vulnerable ballads that carried the emotional core of the story. Critics praised her for bringing pop accessibility and genuine soul to the Broadway stage. The audience laughed, cried, danced, and left inspired. Kinky Boots ran for 6 years and won 6 Tony Awards, including Best Musical and Best Original Score, making Cyndi the first woman to win that category solo. It was a full-circle moment. The woman who had once been dismissed as too weird, too loud, or too out there had just conquered one of the most traditional and competitive spaces in the entertainment world, on her own terms. Cyndi had always believed in the power of being different, and now that belief was center stage, quite literally, 8 times a week. But even with success, controversy found its way in. In 2017, singer Benny Mardones and his songwriting partner Robert Tepper filed a lawsuit claiming that one of the show's closing numbers, "Raise You Up," bore too much resemblance to their 1980s hit, "Into the Night." They alleged similarities in melody, rhythm, and lyrics, particularly around the phrases "raise you up" and "pick you up." It was a messy claim, and while the case didn't go to trial, it cast a brief shadow over an otherwise shining comeback. 2 years later, in 2019, the lawsuit was quietly settled. The details weren't made public, but it never slowed Lauper down. Her work on Kinky Boots had already secured her place as a serious composer and a fearless storyteller. The Broadway world had embraced her, not as a nostalgic figure from the 80s, but as a contemporary creative force. This wasn't a comeback fueled by desperation or nostalgia. It was growth. It was evolution. Cyndi Lauper wasn't chasing her old glory. She was building something entirely new. And in doing so, she reminded everyone that artistry has no expiration date. Reinvention isn't just possible, it's powerful. Cyndi Lauper's legacy was never just about music. Yes, she made us dance, cry, and sing along at the top of our lungs. But beyond the charts and costumes, there was always something deeper at play. A fierce sense of justice, a voice for the voiceless, and a relentless drive to lift up those the world too often leaves behind. Long before it was mainstream or marketable, Cyndi stood shoulder to shoulder with the LGBTQ+ community. She didn't just wave a rainbow flag, she put in the work. She used her platform to speak out when others stayed silent, advocating for equality, safety, and love without apology. In 2008, she co-founded the True Colors Fund, an organization dedicated to ending homelessness among LGBTQ+ youth, a group statistically far more likely to be displaced due to rejection and discrimination. For Cyndi, this work wasn't charity, it was personal. She saw herself in the kids who didn't fit in, who were punished for being different. She remembered the fear of not having a place to go, of being told you weren't enough. Her advocacy grew from her own story, and that gave it power. She spoke from the heart, and people listened. Her activism didn't stop there. As someone who had battled mental health struggles and chronic illness herself, she became a champion for awareness and accessibility. Whether it was psoriasis or depression, she refused to let shame win. Cyndi spoke openly, refusing to sanitize her past or hide her scars. And in doing so, she gave others permission to do the same. Even as the decades passed, Cyndi never slowed down. Into her 70s, she has continued to record music, appear on screen, tour the world, and create. Her voice may have matured, but it never lost its edge. She still walks her own path, unbothered by trends, driven by instinct, and always true to herself. She's played sold-out shows, walked red carpets, and accepted countless awards. But ask anyone who's met her, and they'll tell you, what's most unforgettable about Cyndi isn't her fame. It's her fire, her humor, her humanity. Because Cyndi Lauper is more than a pop icon. She's a survivor, a disruptor, a creator, a fighter for those pushed to the margins. Her life is proof that art doesn't just entertain, it heals. And that being unusual isn't a flaw, it's a gift. In the end, her greatest legacy isn't the music videos or platinum records, it's the people she's touched. The kids who felt seen for the first time, the voices that rose because hers did first. The idea that even if the world doesn't get you, you keep showing up. In your own voice, in your own colors, unapologetically. Cyndi Lauper wasn't just a pop star with a wild sense of fashion and unforgettable hooks. She was a warrior in glitter. She didn't simply push boundaries, she lived beyond them, refusing to shrink herself to fit anyone else's idea of what a woman, an artist, or a human being should be. Every moment of her story, every heartbreak, every triumph, every strange and beautiful twist was a thread in the fabric of something greater: resilience. She came from pain, from rejection, from a world that tried to silence her before she even had the chance to speak. But Cyndi didn't just find her voice. She turned it into a megaphone for anyone who'd ever felt invisible. From the echoes of a locker room to the roar of global stages, from hunger and fear to fierce advocacy and self-acceptance, she kept going. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but with heart. Her story isn't about avoiding darkness. It's about walking through it and still finding color. It's about breaking down and getting back up again and again. And through it all, she stayed true to the one thing the world couldn't take from her: her sense of self, raw, real, unshakably herself. Cyndi Lauper taught us that being different isn't something to survive. It's something to celebrate. She showed us that fun doesn't mean frivolous, and that pop can be a powerful vessel for truth, healing, and connection. She turned pain into melody. She turned survival into art. So if you've ever felt like you don't belong, if you've ever been told you're too strange, too emotional, too loud, too soft, too anything, remember her. Remember that the same voice who sang about fun also sang about pain, about love, about being seen. And most of all, remember that strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like simply refusing to give up.